Hello, everyone. Today we have Aly here as a guest on my podcast. So, welcome, Aly. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Coach Alina.
Thank you for coming here because I had in mind for a very long time to invite you here, and it's such a coincidence that recently I received an email from someone who's like watching probably my channel and also the Sleep Coach School channel where they probably met you, and this person wrote suggested the topic and then also suggested that I could invite you to talk about this topic. So
Well,
I said
thank
like,
you to whomever that was because I'm so excited to be here. You know how much I respect and adore you, Alina. So I'm just thrilled to be here.
oh, thank you so much for coming. Basically, for anyone who maybe is not familiar with you or have never met you, maybe you could say just a few words about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Coach Aly, and I started my relationship with you and knowing you through the Sleep Coach School. And when I went through my own insomnia recovery journey, joining the immunity program, and I was on Green Team with you and Coach Michelle. You were my coaches. And gosh, it was just such a difficult but insightful period of my life. And I think the world of you both. I mean, and then after I kind of graduated from the immunity program, I went through my own recovery, which seemed to take, an extended amount of time, which we're going to discuss and normalize some longer recovery times here. And and then I decided that I really wanted to help others when I got to a point where I felt like, okay, I'm not going to let insomnia call the shots anymore. That's just not going to happen. And it was a call with you when I was kind of in a speed bump. And yeah, I said, I really want to do it, but I'm like afraid it's going to activate some speed bumps and all this. And you're like, so what? You can't wrap yourself in bubble paper. I remember that. And walk through life. There's going to be triggers, and don't let it stop you from doing what you want to do. And I said, brilliant. Of course, that's the answer. So I signed up and did the coach training. I've been coaching for over a year now, and for the Sleep Coach School, and then also my own private practice with one-on-ones. And it's been awesome. Like I finally feel like I've got like footing, I think it takes a while to build up that confidence. But I do feel like I have some of that now. So it's really more comfortable, I guess I should say. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's kind of my little introduction about me. But yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Aly. And I'm so glad that you actually went with that plan. Like you followed that curiosity, that instinct, and not gave into that fear, which of course is understandable when we are doing something new, something like a challenging unknown. Of course, the fear is going to play
Oh yeah,
triggers. It will try
absolutely.
to see like, oh, are you sure? Are you recovered enough to do this? Are you, But then there's desire to help others, and then you see like it's the desire is stronger than fear actually,
Yeah.
and
And
it
it
takes.
really, like at some point it was just like, I value what I want to do and how I want to move forward more than I value sleep. Right. And that was a huge turning point for me because I put such a value on sleep. It was such on this pedestal. Right. And so when it fell off that pedestal and that emotional attachment was less, it was just like, yeah, well, I value these things that I want to do in my life more than I value sleep. Sleep is not an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I stopped giving it that power, things got a lot easier.
Yeah, and let's talk about speed bumps because that's basically the
Yes.
topic that was requested, and I think that we can spend hours talking about it, but you have around 1 hour, so we will try to condense all our knowledge to just to give like people maybe a sense of like how to navigate those
Yeah.
difficult moments. And before we go into this topic, I just want to maybe clarify because not everyone is familiar with the term speed bump. Essentially, what we mean by speed bump is a period, or sometimes people call it like a setback, right?
Yes. Yep.
So
Yep.
in this conversation, like we might skip like or like jump from one term to another, but essentially they're kind of interchangeable.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
mean the same thing. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So, Aly, if you were to describe like the definition of a speed bump or a setback, like what it would be in your opinion?
Yeah. So in my opinion, there's a period of doing better, right? Doing a little bit better. The fear, the hyperarousal, the anxiety have come down a bit. things are getting just a little bit easier. We're just dipping our toe into more surrender, more acceptance of what is and filling that out. And it's like feeling a little bit better. Things are getting a little bit easier. And then, of course, the scared part of our brain is going to come back and check on us. Are you okay? Sure there's no more fear? You sure you got this? And then sure enough, here we are in a speed bump when that amygdala wants to come back and check in on things. And that is really what happens. The amygdala kind of wants to make sure that we're safe, wants to make sure that we're no longer afraid or there's nothing to fear. That perceived danger is not real. And it will periodically come back in and check to make sure that's the case. And when that happens, we experience a speed bump or a setback, however we want to term it. Does that sound about what you would describe it as?
100%. I think one of the things where people kind of stumble is that they are not sometimes sure whether what they're going through is a speed bump or a setback, because they might say something like, I feel like a speed bump is something that you had it easier before, you had some improvement, right?
Yeah.
And then it kind of gets worse. But I feel like I haven't had that moment of where it was even improvement. So I feel like I even didn't have my first speed bump. I'm just struggling. And in that situation, like sometimes what I find helpful is to maybe go a little bit more in detail, like what we mean by a speed bump specifically, because oftentimes we people, and I mean, before I used to think about it, it's just about sleep. I sleep better and then I sleep worse. But in reality, it's not just about sleep. It's sometimes like a speed bump might not even include the sleep part. Sleep can remain the same, but our emotional state can change. Like, let's say we are calm and maybe more accepting, and then we become like not calm and not accepting. But then sleep can be either it's still kind of like the same as it was before or whatever, it's now better, but we still kind of like we feel kind of like a dip in this path.
Yes.
Do you find it that way as well?
Oh, absolutely. And this reminds me a lot of your most recent newsletter, right, that you sent out about the forgetting and the remembering. And I call this the dance of insomnia, right? So, and I say, often that we're going to go between these two inner states of forgetting and remembering, essentially. But it's basically, we're going to go between the two inner states of acceptance and allowing what is, not fighting with reality, kind of being able to surrender to the moment and know that we're going to be okay. And then we're back to, no, this is not okay, and efforting and controlling and fixing and managing and all of that, right? And this is the dance of recovery. We're going to go back and forth between these two inner states, the forgetting and the remembering. And that's kind of what a speed bump looks like in the forgetting part, right? And I described it like that too. It was like, intellectually I knew, but this is, of course, is not just a cognitive process. This is an embodied knowing, right? And it takes a lot of time and experiential learning to really understand and feel that deep within us that we're safe and we're okay. And that's what acceptance ultimately looks like. But we go back and forth between these inner states throughout our recovery journey. It's just totally normal, the part of the process.
Yeah, I love the word dancing. It sounds like less threatening. It sounds not like this kind of like up and down, but it's more like kind of
it's like
like
the waves, like riding the waves, right, of this journey. And it is a dance, right? We're back and forth with it, and it can feel so bewildering and confusing when we get back into the forgetting, because I think the dance and the forgetting and remembering are very, very much the same thing. And these two inner states, we just go back and forth between these until we do finally land at acceptance. Yeah. And it was you again. I quote you a lot, by the way, but that I loved it when you said, I can't remember what newsletter it was in, but maybe we can, attach it to this at the end. But when you said acceptance is the entire journey of recovery, it's not an intermediary task, meaning like we can't bypass any part of the dance. The dance is part of it, right? And so this whole entire journey is about landing at acceptance, but we can't jump there. We can't bypass our way there. We have to go through the experiential learning and understanding to know deep within that we're safe and okay.
Yeah. And I think this just for anyone like maybe who are out of context here about this remembering and forgetting part. Essentially, like what we mean by remembering is more about like understanding that we are safe, understanding that there is no monster
Yeah.
who is chasing us. There is no actual immediate physical threat. It's just that
Yeah.
our brain started to perceive wakefulness and nighttime as something that is potentially dangerous, right? And then behaves as if it's dangerous. And therefore, it elevates our heart rate. It creates a lot of hyperarousal in us. And that hyperarousal makes it difficult for sleep to happen naturally because we
Yes.
cannot sleep when we feel threatened, right? It's a normal thing.
That's right.
We,
Yeah.
we wouldn't want to be asleep when there is actual threat. So in
If
a
there
sense,
was a
like,
real threat, right,
yeah, if there was
exactly.
a
We
real
would
threat,
want to be alerted. That's how our brain works, right? And thank goodness it does, because like Daniel always says, it's a feature, not a bug of the
yeah.
system, right? It's like this is there for a reason, and it's just been misinformed, right? There's just this misunderstanding. Yeah.
Yeah. So the remembering part is this understanding it and realizing like, oh, I'm
Right.
actually safe. I thought I was in danger, but I'm safe, right? And then when speed bump hits or a setback starts, we kind of temporarily forget that, and we again kind of convinced that we are somehow in threat, and then we need to do something to escape it. And as you
Right.
said, this part is really normal, and it actually belongs to this journey. I haven't seen anyone who went through this journey without having speed bumps.
Yeah, I have not either. And it's just part of that biology of the brain too, right? And I think when I started to understand just the neuroscience behind it, it was really helpful because it depersonalized it
Yeah,
almost, right? It made it like, oh, this isn't personal. This is just like part of my wiring, right? It's like it's human nature. This happens to everybody. And that part of our brain, it is a problem solver. It does want to fix the situation. That's its job, right? That's what it knows how to do. And so we kind of go back between these two as well, right? The biology of what our fear response is, and then to, oh, but this isn't a real threat, and I'm okay, and I'm safe, and I can allow this to be what it is, right? And so it's just like there's a little bit of a fight with our biology,
yeah,
right? And you used that term in the newsletter too. And I was like, yes, it's so true. So it's like allowing that to
yeah,
be what it is as well, I think is equally important part of the journey, right? It's like, because neither of these we can fight it or control. So
exactly. So let yourself dance, we can
yeah,
say. Just
yeah,
dance. Yeah, yeah. But it could be difficult in the moment. What I notice is that when I'm talking like to a person about like how the recovery process goes, and I'm trying to normalize those moments of speed bumps or setbacks as much as possible. And even when the person comes into this process already knowing like, yes, I know it's not going to be a linear journey. It's not going to be like smooth and everything is clear and so on. And they're kind of like already feel like, okay, I'm ready to experience a speed bump, right? So they enter with this kind of like confidence. But what I also
yeah.
notice, like when the actual speed bump happens, it
All
feels
that.
very real. It's
That's
just,
right.
yes,
All that goes out the window.
yes, all that Zen mindset, all that acceptance of this, like, of course, it's not linear. It all goes out the window.
It does. Because we understand it cognitively, right? We get it on an intellectual level. It's like, yes, okay, not linear. Right. Then when we're in it, it's like, ah, we kind of go back into that, no, this can't be happening again. And so we get into that, trying to fix and solve again. And it's just the normal, natural part of that scared, fear response in our brain. And it really will land eventually on there's nothing to be done, right? But it does take this dance
Yeah.
throughout, and it takes as long as it takes, right? Like this is the other part where that was one thing for me in my journey where I always kind of was looking for the end, like when is this going to end? And I hear that a lot. And I wish I could tell somebody, and give them something tangible, but we can't, of course, because everybody's journey is going to look different. What I can say is it generally takes a lot longer than we want it to. I can say that was true for me. But really what was helpful for me is one, repeating to myself, it's going to take as long as it takes. And the other thing that was really helpful, particularly towards the end of my journey, when I was still experiencing speed bumps, but they were less intense, right? They were, the severity and the length of them were de-intensifying. And so that was nice. And I really was able to move through them with a bit more ease, even though they were still showing up. And I got to this point where I was like, well, maybe my recovery goes on for the rest of my life, you know? And even if that was the case, I would be okay with that. Like, that would be okay. I'm like, I don't know, 85% better than what I was when I was, yeah. So that was okay. And that was such a huge, I didn't realize in the moment when I really came to that that was going to be what propelled, you know, the rest of my journey, because I was completely at acceptance with what was, right? And because of that, of course, things got easier. But I was really genuinely like, you know what? If this is as good as it gets, I'm okay with that. And that is a huge place of surrendering, right? To accepting what is, no longer fighting with my reality. Okay, this is what it is. I can live with this. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to be okay. And, you know, just that little bit took me kind of the rest of the way. So it was powerful.
And when you had this realization, how did it feel? Did you feel
You know,
more a relief or something else?
yeah, it felt like a relief. It felt, I always think about like fear contracts us, right? Fear, like we get tense, we feel contracted. And freedom, thoughts of freedom, they expand us, right? They make us like feel, oh, what a relief, right? There's freedom there, there's liberation there. And that's what that thought and that genuine acceptance of what is felt like. It's like, okay, is it perfect? No. Does it have to be? No. Right? It's like this, it just was what it was. And when I genuinely came to accept that, yeah, things just got a lot easier.
Yeah. No, I resonate with this experience a lot, because for me, that's exactly what it felt like at the end. And, you know, I would say that for some people who are still in this process, right, hearing this, and then they would kind of like imagine this, like, okay, if this is like, you know, I can accept that, even if it goes on like for as long as it goes, right? And for some people, this sense of like liberation and ease might not show up yet.
Yeah.
Do you have any like words of encouragement for them?
Well, you can't manufacture acceptance. That would be one of the biggest things, because, you know, I hear a lot in coaching and one-on-ones, like, I'm trying to accept, I'm trying to, you know, this and this and that. It's like, and of course we are. And if we knew like exactly how to do it, we would do it. We all would, right? But unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. It is an organic, natural process. There's nothing special or unique about me or you. It just happens with time and moving through this dance of recovery. I really do believe that. I really feel like it's something that you just get to, right? Over the time and over the process. Because like the other thing that I like that Daniel says is all speed bumps are about the process of abandoning the struggle, right? And the only way we can really abandon that struggle is to go back and forth between it, right? In this little dance. And so for me, I would say, you know, from my experience and what I've kind of learned is you will get there. You will get to acceptance, but there's no way to force it. There's no way to, you know, jump to it. Like you say, it's not this intermediary task.
Yeah.
It's the whole journey. And little by little, you know, it comes naturally and organically. And there's nothing special you need to do.
Yeah. I totally understand. I resonate and understand this point, because we often get into this idea that, okay, if I accept this well enough, then things will change overnight. But that's unfortunately, that's not how things go. And it's we need to go through this dance, essentially.
Yeah.
Because I cannot imagine, like, I wouldn't be able to get to the point of this kind of like okay, I've done everything I could, and now I can just like let the rest figure itself out. I cannot figure it out anymore. So I'm just gonna allow it to go as it goes. And to get to that place, I had to go through the periods of time when I was very not accepting. I was very resisting. So it's more
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think really like for this process, what really is necessary, and maybe you can share like your thoughts on that, is not much is needed from us to have this process to unfold. In my
Yeah.
experience, like what is really needed is this openness and willingness to explore new points of view, explore new
Yes.
perspectives. Just willingness, not necessarily like actually having new perspectives or having this new
Yes.
accepting mindset, because as you said, this is not something that we can control, but just being like willing to
I
go
couldn't
through
agree
this.
more.
And that's all
I,
that's required.
yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Alina. I think, we all start with sort of a choice, a willingness to be open to the possibility that there might be another way. And, that is really kind of the first step, or that first like requirement, I guess, of recovery is there has to be a willingness. There really, really does. Because if we're not willing to try something new, or we're not willing to see the possibility of a different way, then we're kind of just digging our heels in the sand, going, nope, I'm not willing to do it any other way. And that's okay too, right? Everybody gets to have their own journey and their own path, and whatever works for you, great. But we do start with that willingness and openness. I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah. And Ali, what was your experience of your speed bumps? Let's maybe split it into like, let's say, stages of your recovery process, because I can imagine that your experience of speed bumps in the beginning of
Yeah.
recovery was different than it was in the middle and then at the end. So
Yeah.
maybe you can just walk us through this. Like, what was your first speed bumps felt like?
You know, Gosh, it's kind of hard for me to remember now. It's interesting because it's kind of in the rear view for so
Mm.
long now that I'm like, okay, what was it like? Which is actually a good thing. And I think it's another like really cool thing that our brain does, that we don't remember the intensity of the pain, right? Because if we did, we would never like have another kid, for example, right? Like we don't remember the intensity, which is a nice benefit of the thing that the brain does for us. But if I can go back, I remember them being really, really intense. And that scared part of my brain just freaking out, just panicking, like wanting to fix it, wanting to manage it, wanting to control it, doing everything, trying all the things, right? And when I found the sleep coach school and I started to hear and these new ways of responding, I think initially my reaction was, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Like, in order to get through this, I have to be awake and be okay with it, right? The befriending wakefulness concept. I remember before I signed up, thinking to myself, I will do anything it takes, to recover. I will do anything. And then I joined the program, and the first thing I hear is, and you have to learn to be okay with being awake. And I'm like, except for that, you know, I had a lot of resistance at first. And that's so common and that's so normal. And so if anybody out there is feeling that way, like, just know, of course, that is your initial reaction. Like, all humans are going to start from a place of, that seems unimaginable, right? Because nobody wants to be uncomfortable. Fear is uncomfortable. And that is just human nature. But part of this journey, of course, is recognizing that it is safe to be uncomfortable. It is safe to feel fear and anxiety and all of these emotions, sensations, and thoughts that come with that. It's just really uncomfortable, but not dangerous. So that took a while, and it did, like you just said, require a willingness, required me to be open to the possibility that another way might exist, and it might be the way through. And I had tried everything else, because most people that find us, they have tried everything, right, when they finally come to us. So the good news there is that most people come with a willingness because they've tried everything else. but it might take them a minute, right? It took me a minute. And to kind of go, okay, I guess this is what I'm going to do, you know? And then during that process, of course, I had speed bumps, and I don't remember the whole entirety of it, I will say, but I just know that there were many speed bumps. As I went through my journey, they seemed to get less in intensity and severity. But I did have a couple of really extended long speed bumps toward the end of my journey. I even had like a sleepless night towards the end of my journey, you know, because that was one of my fears. And so, of course, that was something I had to face and make peace with. What I found is that every single speed bump represented a fear that I was needing to meet and make peace with. I often didn't know what the fear was until after the speed bump passed. And then I was like, oh, that was about this, right? The insight always comes after, because when we're in a state of fight or flight and in that survival brain, like we know, our focus narrows, like we're really just kind of seeing red. We're in that survival state and we can't process in the same way. But as soon as the speed bump would end and I would have that clarity, I'd be like, oh, it's about that fear. And I'm not even kidding when I tell you, I speed bump after speed bump with every single fear that I had around sleep. And it was a little bit like whack-a-mole, right? Like you think you've got them, and then here pops another one. It was, you know, and it was just like that for some time until, you know, the very end, my very last speed bump, the fear that I had to meet was around meds. And I had to make peace with my fear around meds. And that was huge for me. And I did. And since then, you know, I haven't had a speed bump since. So that was like my last big one. And, you know, there might be more. I don't know. Like we can't, like in that other chat we did for Aly's take, that house analogy that you gave resonated with so many people. And it's so true. Like there's little nooks and crannies where these fears kind of hide, these hidden fears. They're usually little minor ones, right? The big ones we've usually addressed. But kind of later on in the journey, these little ones will like pop up, you know? And we're like, oh, that's still there, right? And so this is what those speed bumps are, is they're really those opportunities to meet and make peace with all of the fears we have around sleep. Because in my humble opinion, recovery is about freedom. It's about freedom from all the fears we have around sleep.
Yeah,
And
100% agree.
That's liberating, right?
Yes, it is so liberating, like to realize that you don't have to really depend on anything, any circumstance or any external aid or anything. Like you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think the right thoughts. You don't have to have a perfect mindset. You really don't. And this is something that is learned kind of the hard way, usually. Yeah. And you cannot think your way into this. You need to experience, you need to experience going through, you know, okay, let me try this. And then it doesn't work. And then you realize like, okay. Yeah. And then that's how also acceptance gets kind of like acquired, because we use all our imagination to, you know, to address this. Yeah. And then finally, like that's when, you know, you're familiar with the concept of the surrender sleep, the sleep that happens in the early morning
hours of the morning,
when it's like already usually like we have like a breakdown or whatever, this kind of like this, you know, just sobbing. And I just remember my like all-nighters that I had, and it's just like at the end, like I would like her sobbing, because I was like, I would still have this kind of like, okay, if I accepted this, right, if I, you know, thought of it that way, it would come, and I would feel hopeful the whole night. And then when it's already started, the dawn outside, and then
you just break down.
It just break down. I would like sob uncontrollably. Like my husband would like start like soothing me, is like, oh, come on, it's okay, and so on. And I had to do this. And sometimes after that sobbing, I would actually fall asleep because I didn't care, because I was like, okay, there's nothing to lose. Yeah. And that's how I was like, oh my God, how did this sleep happen? Surrender sleep, right? Which also teaches us something. It teaches us that that's exactly like we cannot manufacture sleep.
Yeah. Yes.
And unfortunately,
I had those definitely too.
Yeah, it takes a lot of these difficult moments for us to realize, I think.
Oh, I
And
agree with you. I had those too. Those nights where just, gosh, you know, kind of feeling hopeful, feeling brave, feeling courageous, like I got this, going into the night prepared, and then, of course, come 5, 6 a.m., just like, I can't do this anymore. And it's really challenging in those moments. The other thing I think is helpful to mention, and we kind of already touched on it, is around this whole idea of acceptance again, is like, we can't do it as a means to an end.
oh yeah,
Right. And I see a lot of people get stuck here. I got stuck here myself. Right. And it's like, I'm going to do all this work and I'm going to accept and allow all this because it'll lead to sleep. Right. So I'm going to do all this stuff so that I can sleep. And unfortunately, that's not how this works. It's a new way of being. It's a new way of responding. It's a new way of living. Right. And it's like intrinsically deep. Right. It's this whole embodied thing. It's not a cognitive, okay, I'm going to accept and allow this so that I can sleep.
yeah,
Right. That's a means to an end. And it just backfires because that's not the way this journey works. Right. We're doing all this and sleep does come back as a byproduct, but we do this inner work as a new way of experiencing discomfort, a new way of living our lives, a new way of being. Right. And that is the genuineness of it that leads to change, leads to that new neural pathway developing. And so I just wanted to clarify that because I just see so many people just got stuck there.
yeah. I've been in that position of like feeling stuck because I also like my brain was so smart.
Yeah.
Everything it could get its hands on, it would turn it into some sort of like a tool, a weapon, or a means to an end, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so smart. We need to give it credit. Like it's very imaginative, or how to say creative. It's very creative.
Yes. Yes.
And I think it's like as you said, like it's a feature, not a bug. It's
Uh-huh.
what our brains are supposed to do. Turn like
Right.
everything, like when you have like a, what is it saying, like a when you have a hammer, everything is becomes a nail or something like this. Like
Yeah. Yeah. I'm terrible with analogies, but I know exactly what you're
yeah,
thinking of. Yeah.
yeah, no,
I always mess them up.
but basically, essentially, yeah, like our brain is designed to problem solve. We cannot change this nature, so it's not about like declaring war on our brain, because this is often what I also um encounter when I'm talking to people, is that they become afraid or angry or upset with their own brain, with their own
Uh-huh.
biology, with their own survival
Uh-huh.
system.
Yeah.
And that is also not helpful, I
Right.
think, because
I
it
agree.
becomes now, instead of like having two like um, um, points to address, now we are trying to fix ourselves also, like
Yeah.
fix our anxiety, but also fix our sleep. And then there's two goals that we are trying to kind of like pursue at once, and none of it is gonna be reached. And that's
Yeah.
a frustrating place to be in. And I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I have too. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember that feeling. Yeah. Just feeling really stuck, and going, but so, because we can't trick the brain, right? And so I see this a lot too, and I did this too, and what happens with it is can be so interesting is that you really do have your first experience of maybe surrender sleeper, but or something, just a moment of, okay, it is what it is. I'm going to be okay. And we come to this little moment of genuine acceptance and we sleep.
Yeah.
And then we try to reproduce that, right?
Yes.
We try to recreate that moment where we're like, oh my gosh, what happened? What did I do? Well, you genuinely felt it would be fine and it's okay. And you were going to be fine with whatever was. And so, of course, we sleep. And then we try to reproduce that and try to manufacture acceptance, right? The next night, we're like, well, it worked last night. Well, yeah, that because you genuinely were there. And tonight you're just like, I accept, I accept.
Yeah.
It's like, but it doesn't work that way, right? We can't trick the brain. It knows. It's a feeling, right? Between the whole thing, the mind body are intrinsically connected. We can't fool one or the other, right? So it's just, yeah, it's a place where I see people get stuck, and I did myself. So totally normal, totally human. And
it is
yeah,
normal. And what I wanted also to bring up this topic, and this is what the person who sent me an email asked about, that usually there, at least like this person like wrote like that there is an impression that every time someone talks about speed bumps, it feels like they're talking about those kind of like very short moments of like, okay, it's like a dip in the process, and then it kind of like you go out. So it kind of creates an impression that there is some kind of standard duration of a speed bump, right? And then when a person enters like a period when it lasts longer, it lasts maybe weeks or maybe like months, it feels like that, right? So they feel maybe not represented, like their experiences are not being like validated or discussed.
right.
And so I this is a good topic to touch on, because I think I mean, I definitely had it. I had a speed bump when it lasted like several months for me. I would say it was like a period, like 5 or 6 months, something like this. And you mentioned that you also had lengthy speed bumps.
Yeah.
So
I had lengthy speed bumps. I think that I'm kind of trying to remember, but I know I mean, it was like well over a month.
yeah,
But the whole period of that in the deep throes of insomnia, it felt like one perpetual kind of speed bump, right? Because like up and down, up and down, up and down. And it'd be, maybe a couple nights of okay, decent, and then several weeks of, just a big long speed bump. And then a couple of nights sprinkled in there, just of okayness. And then, I mean, it was just like that a lot. And,
yeah,
um, that is, it is again, totally normal. Those longer speed bumps are absolutely part of the process for so many of us that went through recovery, for me as well. So, and clearly for you too, I think it's really important to normalize that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think here, and maybe you also felt it this way, I don't know. For me, this is the area where terminology kind of hits its limitation. Because what do you define as a speed bump? Because as you said, like you had a long, like over several, like more than a month period when it was like up and down. So would you consider it to be like one speed bump, or it was like like a lot of tiny?
Right. So many speed bumps in there.
Yeah. So we can look at it from different perspectives. Yes, of course, we can label it as like a speed bump, like, okay, it's just like lasts like, like 2-3 months, whatever, right? So for me, like, yeah, like if I look back at my experience with that kind of like lengthy speed bump, like it was in the second half of my journey, it was like 5 or 6 months, something like this. But it was not like all like, the same. It was kind of like this, right? It just felt like the whole period was
I feel like the whole thing was a speed bump.
Yeah, exactly. But I could also look at it from the perspective. There were like just a very high frequency of smaller speed bumps. So like, I think for people, this is what like I had an idea to start maybe communicating like, okay, at some point you don't have to really go into this like terminology or try to define like whether you are in a speed bump or you're not in a speed bump. Really what the terminology here is, like the language that we are using, speed bumps, befriending wakefulness, sleep efforts, whatever that is, right? Even recovery as a terminology. Hold them kind of loosely, because like we don't want to create more thinking about like, oh, this is like, am I in a speed bump? Am I not in a speed bump? Is it the right duration of a speed bump? And then there's like a lot of like extra thinking process starts, which is necessarily unnecessary, I think. And what the primary goal of terminology is to show people that, hey, this is normal.
Yeah.
It has a name.
It's to validate their experience.
Yeah, it's just to validate and say this is normal. It's been observed in so many people. You're not alone in this. And most importantly, there are people who recovered, like went through this whole process of recovery, having had those things, speed bumps and all that. So just because you're experiencing something like this, which has a name, which is like understandable, known, familiar, right? It doesn't mean that you cannot like recover because there's like people who went the same journey with the same element,
Yes,
and they
absolutely.
kind of get on the other side of it, right? So it's just like terminology is here to help us just validate our experiences, see them as normal for the situation that we are in, and that's it. Other
Yeah,
than that, like going into details, like yeah, I have this kind of like this duration. Is it okay? But I'm having longer. It's irrelevant. What really
it
is
really
relevant
is.
is
Yep.
what response we are choosing, like how we
Yep.
are navigating this, how we are showing up to this experience. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether we call it like a big speed bump, or if we call it a setback, or if it's like a million tiny speed bumps. It doesn't really
It's,
matter.
it's so true. It's so true. And I agree with you. The more we kind of hyperfixate on, defining this, what is this? I have to like get into the nitty gritty of it. The more we go into that hyper arousal because we're hyperfixating, we're going to be hyper alert. We're just vamping up the hyper arousal, and it doesn't matter. It's like speed bump, let it be, go. That's what it is. You don't have to get into the weeds with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And did you notice that like basically almost every speed bump felt in the same way? There were elements that were kind of like repeating itself, and you just
Oh yeah.
like I started noticing patterns because I went through so many of those speed bumps that I started like seeing like, hey, this is like this thing that feels new is actually not new. It's just like maybe a
Right.
different story, a different
hmm
side of that fear.
hmm
But it's
hmm
actually I'm like, and what I started doing, and this was it was super helpful for me just to see things clearly when I was in this speed bump, is that I created in my mind, informally, I created
hmm
like a checklist, like a bingo of a speed bump, where
hmm
I would just outline all the experiences that I usually go through when I'm in a speed bump.
hmm
So just when next speed bump happens, I just kind of like check them all and just see like,
Yeah.
okay, here's this. I have it. Check.
Oh,
Like
they're all
nothing
showing
unusual.
up.
Yeah, like check mark, check mark, check mark. And
hmm
it was so helpful for me to just really get out of this narrative that, oh my God, this speed bump is somehow unique or worse, or the one that I
Right.
cannot recover, because every single one of them felt the same way to some extent.
Well, absolutely. Every single one feels like the worst one ever, pretty much, right? We always feel like we're back at square one.
Yes.
I hear that a lot from people, and it's just the nature of speed bumps, and it's also just the nature of that scared part of our brain that wants to tell us the scariest story that it can, right? Even though it's not true.
Yeah.
So that is very, very much the case. And it was also helpful for me as I continued along this journey, that recognizing that my thoughts when I was in a speed bump could not be trusted, right? It was
Yeah.
like, okay, part of going into this speed bump, this fight or flight, back into this survival kind of energy is distorted thinking, catastrophic thinking, rumination. All of this is just part of the survival response. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. This is how your brain works, right? And so when I recognized that and I had all these scary thoughts, I realized I don't have to believe all these. They're not true, right? And again, it's not personal. It's just your brain trying to look out for you, right? So that was really helpful when I was really deep in it, and having kind of like you, kind of like this checklist. But I would write after I would go through the speed bump, and I would have some insights afterwards. I would write those down,
Mm.
and it would be like what fears came up, because they were sometimes the same, but they were sometimes brand new ones that I was like, really? I have a fear about that too. Yep. So I would write that down, and I would write down those insights. And so then when I found myself in a speed bump again, I would go back to that,
Yeah.
and I would read that, which would actually help get my prefrontal cortex back online a little bit and back to the remembering
Yeah.
a little bit faster. It's like, oh yeah, don't trust these thoughts. My right now, my brain is not a reliable narrator. Most of the time, it's not a reliable narrator, but particularly right now, not at all, right? And so that was helpful for me because I would kind of get into that remembering a little bit more. So for what it's worth, yeah, write down those insights when you're out of it, when you're clear.
Yeah, that's actually a very good insight, I think, because I I noticed that when I was talking to people, about like after their recovery, like a lot of them actually did what you described. Like I just wrote down the stuff that I kind of like insights or any sort of like new understanding, new thought that
Yep.
appeared. And I just like
Yep.
was putting it down so that I can remind myself of it later on.
Yeah.
And this is like
Yeah.
what I did and so on. And this could be something like this could be helpful for others, just to not
Yeah.
like kind of like I don't know, expect that that's like the speed bump will end miraculously, but sometimes we can help ourselves out by just reminding ourselves of our previous experiences with those, how we failed,
Absolutely.
and how actually things resolved in the end.
Yep.
This, as you said,
Yep.
like it can bring back online the this prefrontal cortex and help us
Yeah.
see things clearer.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was really a helpful little practice. And, I remember I also at some point in my journey, I can't really remember when, but I did like make a list of all of my fears around sleep. And I mean, the list was long, like fear of how I'm going to feel the next day, fear of the early morning meeting, fear of a sleepless night, fear of the meds, fear of this, fear of that, fear of that. I mean, there were so many. And so it was really helpful for me to see them like in black and white, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the ones that I knew of consciously. I think that there's always some subconscious stuff and these are kind of those hidden ones that we talked
Yeah.
about in the corners, right? But all of the conscious ones I listed out, and I went through a process of working with every single one of those fears. Um, Generally out of a speed bump when I was in a clearer state of mind, that was really helpful to work through the fears. You could still do it when you're in a speed bump, but just understanding that, when you are in that space of fight or flight, again, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have the clarity because you're in that survival brain so much. But as that passes and working through those fears, gosh, it was so valuable to me because every single one of them represented a limiting belief.
Mm.
And those limiting beliefs are where I see people get really, really stuck, right? Because we don't even recognize that they're necessarily a belief. We believe they're part of our personality.
Oh
I
yeah.
did, you know? And it was like, oh, you mean that's not just who I am? This is a belief system that I've developed and adapted, and it's actually keeping me stuck, right? That was a huge, like, wow, mind blown. I have to really unravel these limiting beliefs that are keeping me stuck. And there were a lot of them.
Yeah. Wow. Limiting beliefs, the topic itself is so interesting to me. Up to this day, I'm still like, this is where like the work in progress for me because I have so many limiting beliefs about other stuff where I'm
Yeah.
experiencing anxieties. And I would love to talk to you about this more, but I know that
Oh,
we have a limitation today.
sorry, I
So
got a little bit out of.
no, but
But they play into speed bumps. They are so
exactly.
much a part of it. So it's
Yeah.
worth bringing up because it's part of in my opinion, it's part of the work of recovery. It
Yeah.
was some of the most important work I did,
Yeah.
you know.
Maybe this is like a cliffhanger. Maybe we can do a second episode
Yeah,
like
let's do it. I'd
where we
love
talk
to.
about the working with limiting beliefs and
Yeah,
bunking those, like unraveling those, seeing them for what they are.
yeah,
And I think this could be also very
absolutely.
valuable talk.
I
But
agree.
anyway,
I agree.
thank you so much, Ali, for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to have you for the first time here, and I
No, it
hope
was
that
my
I will see
pleasure.
you again sometime on this channel. Thank
Oh,
you
I
so
would
much.
love to. Anytime, Alina, please reach out. I love having conversations with you and could talk about this stuff all day. So absolutely. Anytime.